So one of the things that I love about teaching and teaching technology at Drury is I get these student requests in, like, how do I make this work in Revit? And the things that I like about that first is that the thinking is, of course, outside of the box, but then it's also designed outside of Revit. And then the goal is to look at a tool like Revit in terms of how do I get this idea to work? How do I turn this into architecture that's functioning and into something that's going to further the design thinking on the project? And so there's a bunch of different ways to start looking at building this ribbon. This is really the piece that's in question right here. And as always, inside of Revit, there's a lot of different ways to do the task. If you're watching this and you know of a better way, absolutely feel free to email me, post it on the YouTube video, and let's continue to work together to resolve these complex forms that we're all striving for in architecture. So let's look at the couple of different methods that I would use that I know about currently to begin modeling that type of form. So the first thing that came to my mind was actually just using the roof tool in a really simple kind of way. So drawing a box, and I don't know the exact dimensions on this project, so I'm just going to set this up as a roof footprint that's about 20 by, let's say, 70. So that is a base form. If I start with this as my roof, I'm going to click the green check and switch this to an axonometric view. You see that I get a hip roof, not at all what I'm looking for. So let's start by turning this into a flat roof by going Edit Footprint. I'm going to get rid of all the slopes, and so I get a flat roof by doing that. And the tool that I'm going to use is Modify Subelements. So if I use Modify Subelements, I can begin adding points along the edge of my roof. And, I should be looking closely at exactly what's happening with that roof form. But I know it's sort of bending and folding as it moves along a path. So I'm just going to add in a few points and get an abstraction of the shape that the student was going for on the project. So I'm using add points and just adding a few points along the edge. So by doing this, if I select my roof and select Modify Subelements with these few points that are added along the edge, I can begin to push and pull the roof form to make these different folds. And use the Tab key to hopefully select, not the Escape key, but I want to select these points, and I can type in different numbers to begin building up this sort of folding form across. That should have been 3, not 30. There we go. And you can see how that's starting to shape that roof. Now, the problem with this tool, in this specific example though, if I look at how this edge is folding down, if I were to go and say make these points very low, so I'm going to set them 10 feet lower than the outside edge, or then I should say level 2 is essentially what that's referencing. I actually get a pretty big problem with my model, and that is that this edge right here is definitely thinner than this edge because it's not rotating this axis around. It's not sort of truly folding that down across this edge. It's sort of keeping this fold on the XZ axis or the YZ axis, and it's simply pulling that edge down. And that's really creating some problems with the geometry. So I know that if this was sort of a minor folding kind of thing, I could probably make this work. But I already can tell that this, because of the sort of extreme nature of this coming all the way down to the ground, that I know that this isn't going to work exactly like I need it to. But if it was doing something a little less severe, then this would probably be the fastest and most efficient method to get this working really well. So, as I always tell people, don't be afraid of the delete key. It doesn't hurt nearly as bad as you think it does. So let's delete that and let's start over. So the other method that I would use to build something like this is probably creating a basic mass form and then using the roof and roof by face tool to generate that outer edge. So let's look at how we would do that. So I would begin by going to Component and Model in Place, and I'm going to select the massing family. And what I'm going to start with is a basic box. old school me would say, let's draw 2 reference planes in. New school me is saying, well, let's model something to build the reference planes. So let's stick with new school me and be visual rather than whatever the reference plane tool was. As of late, I've been trying to avoid them because they are confusing, definitely difficult to teach. So right now what I've got is a 20-foot wide by 20-foot tall by 70-foot long box. And I'm going to use that box to help establish 2 planes, one on each side, that are going to begin to create the inside and outside edges of this form. So by doing that, I'm going to come in and I'm going to say set this face as my reference plane. And I'm going to turn on show just so you can kind of see that, hopefully a little bit better. And I'm going to draw a line, one line on each side, or a series of lines on each side that begin to represent these different folds. So I'm going to start here. And if you notice, I'm going to make a slight change to the design. The roof tool, the roof by face tool, doesn't particularly like a straight up and down line to do a roof by face. It just won't work, which is a little bit unfortunate. But, let's just think about the design evolving a little bit. I don't know that being a vertical straight up and down line is completely critical to the design. The key is that I sort of have one line that defines the ribbon on this side and another line that defines the ribbon on that side. And I want to merge between those two. So let's bring this up about 7 feet and then over, and then a longer line that comes up to about here, and then the slopes back down a bit, and then it comes across flat. And then I'm going to start a line back up. And notice this is again where I'm redefining this a little bit, which is something I'm never really too proud of. I always would rather Revit do exactly what I want to. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it's completely important that those lines are actually true verticals. I'm going to define this coming across. Should have been a little bit shorter. Let's edit that before I get any further. And pull that line back. Start my next line up. So this is a fairly long slope coming down. My line tool, I want to make sure it's going to snap to my point. Does not want to snap to that point. There we go. It's just a matter of getting the right angle in so Revit would know exactly what I'm wanting it to do. So this is coming down, and then I'm going to make one more fold with this coming in. And I'm sure that that's not exactly what this ribbon is doing. In fact, that does come all the way down and returns back to that line. So let's go ahead and complete that. So I'm positive that's not exactly what's going on. But the idea is there, I hope. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller. Yeah, close enough. So we've got one side, and now I'm going to flip over and I'm going to use this cube to do the exact same thing with subtle variations to that line on the opposite side. So again, I'm going to use set. I'm going to pick this side of the cube's reference plane. And this time, similar line, but with variations on it. Now, if I want this line right here to match exactly, one of the things that I can do is I can always go in and use my pick tool. You edit this back down just a little bit. So I'm already seeing that that's off more than I want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to use my pick lines tool. So remember, I'm working on this face of this cube, and I can use my pick line tool to actually place a line referencing this flat line right here, because that portion of the design to me does look completely flat, as in a roof that becomes a floor that we can walk on. So those two lines, I know that those are exactly in the same plane, which is important. And then I'm going to use my trim tool to piece those two lines together. And then I'm going to continue on making additional lines. So we'll bring this up and over and across and down, and then we'll return it to that line. So you can see that I have these two lines, one on each side of this cube, that I'm going to use to define this ribbon. So at this point, I can go ahead and select and delete my box. So I'm down to just those two pieces. And I'm going to select the two lines and use Create Form. And I get self-intersecting geometry. Okay, so that's kind of a drag. Thought that would work just wonderfully. Let's hope that by pulling those two things in just a little bit, we can get that to work. Yeah, so I think the issue at hand was simply that those two pieces connecting, Revit didn't know exactly how to resolve those. My guess is that I can get these pieces close enough now, once I've sort of built that ribbon, that should work just fine. Yeah, you can see once I touch those edges together, the system starts to fall apart a little bit. So I'm just going to get them close. Adjacent will be fine. The actual thickness of the roof should intersect, and we should be okay with that, which isn't going to build sort of perfect geometry, but it's going to give me what I need. So I'm going to go ahead and say Finish Mass. And now that I have this in my basic model, it's outside of the family now, I'm in the entire Revit file, I can come in and say Architecture, Roof, by Face. And I'm going to select this first set of faces across, just like that, and say Create Roof. And I'm getting a cannot make roof portion. So let's divide this into a few pieces and see if we can't figure out exactly where the error is happening. So apparently the error is happening when I'm trying to do a multiple together, which isn't the ideal thing, doing them one at a time, because you can see I'm getting an error. I'm not getting the geometry to form the way I need it to. So let's try a slightly different approach with this, since Roof by Face doesn't want to work. My testing, that was working just fine, which is a little bit odd. But let's see two things here really quick. I might be able to use a wall system instead of my roof system. So just going wall and wall by face, and again I'm using a generic 12-inch wall. And it's not wanting to do this surface right here, as that surface actually is completely horizontal. It's kind of the same issue that I was having with in a way, it's the same issue that I was having with the roof and these verticals. So wall, wall by face. I can build these, but it's this piece that's completely flat that it doesn't want to quite work with. So if I go to roof, roof by face, I should be able to convert that. Create selection. It's just putting it in the wrong direction. But if I set that up to do a 1 foot positive offset, it should roughly match up. So you can see it's not building the geometry perfectly. I can try and do a join, modify join, geometry to geometry. But again, that's probably not going to work perfectly either. Join. No, it's really not. So you can see I'm starting to get at the idea of that form, but not quite there yet. So there's one other thing that I want to look at with the model, which could potentially help resolve this. If you look at these particular planes, 4 points don't have to be coplanar. 3 points always lie in the same plane when we're talking about three-dimensional geometry. So these pieces are actually twisting in 3D space. You can see it, in particular, you can see it on this plane right here, how those 4 points do actually sort of twist around. So if I were to go back and edit this ribbon, I am curious as to see whether or not I can't resolve some of the complexity of the roof. So I'm going to select my form, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding in some edges. So if I click Add Edge, I can go corner to corner to essentially triangulate this and make sure that these are not how do I want to say this, so that they are not curved surfaces. Now, this becomes a bit of a design issue. Do I want that to be a curved surface, or do I actually want this to be a surface that is built out of triangles and that they are, in fact, flat shapes? It certainly becomes a constructability issue. If I'm building these in triangles and they are flat, they are actually not curved. And let's do this one really quick here, especially to see what we're talking about. If I can build those as triangles and not as curved shapes, obviously I'm greatly reducing the complexity and making this something that is far easier to construct in reality. So perhaps this is a good move. Perhaps this will also help Revit resolve forming this roof for me as well. So let's see here. I believe I've got all the surfaces in place now. So I'm going to go ahead and say Finish Mass. And then let's look at the roof tool one more time. Architecture, roof, and roof by face. And so hopefully we can select multiples of these surfaces this time. And I want to start with this first ribbon and create roof. And you can see there's a little bit of a problem with how this comes down and touches the edge right here. I think we can probably resolve that later, or I might be able to build sort of a custom component to fit over that if I just am not happy with how that geometry resolves itself. But I'm just going to leave it like it is for right now. And so I've got one roof coming across that direction. I'm going to build one additional roof with this top piece. So that's giving me a note that it's got both upward and downward geometry, which is kind of fun. So let's undo that really quick. And on this piece right here, I'm going to add selections to face. Until we get past that vertical. And essentially what that note was saying is, really don't want to do this. So let's see here. Let's build one more roof now. So we're going to go recreate roof. And I'm going to go to roof, roof by face, and we'll start with this upper piece. Create roof. So you can see how that's starting to seam together. Again, not really happy with that geometry right there, but I think I could probably resolve it later. And then one last piece right here, create roof. So definitely not happy with how that geometry has resolved itself. So in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So I think both of these pieces right here might be good candidates for doing wall by face. But for right now, I'm going to leave that. And we'll just assume that we can resolve those. Those are sort of minor issues in the grander scheme of making this very complex roof ribbon that comes across. So what I do want to do is, one of the reasons why I built these as separate roofs is, if you notice in this model, this actually cuts back at some point and lands further back on the roof. And two reasons why that's divided up into two pieces. The first is definitely wanted to be able to allow Revit to resolve coming up and then coming over. using the roof tool, it doesn't really know exactly how to make that happen. That's a pretty complex geometrical form. The other thing that this gives me the opportunity to do is I can use the vertical opening and select my roof and simply carve out that shape that I want to eliminate by drawing a reference line just like that using that vertical opening tool, and that will cut back a portion of the roof for me, which is really, really nice to have. It's a very easy way to make that edit. So the last thing I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and hide that massing element so you can see a little more clearly what's going on. And you can see sort of how I begin to cut that piece back. Now, the other question is, why use the massing? Why use the roof tool? Why not just use the massing tool? And the reason to me is pretty simple. If I come into my level 1 now, actually I'm going to draw this on the site level. If I'm looking down on this at my site level and I come in and do a wall, and I know this has curtain walls along the base. Let's say that I have a reasonably complex curtain wall that's going to come across the underside of this. That's also going to be off axis, because at this point, why wouldn't it be off axis? Because there's already so much complexity here. Why wouldn't we add to it? So that's the curtain wall that I have beginning to come together, drawn in at level 1. If I select this curtain wall, I can say attach, and I can begin selecting the roof, and it's going to start forming the underside of that curtain wall directly with my roof. Attach and attach. Oops, missed my click. Attach. So now that piece is working directly with the underside of the roof. And at this point now I can begin adding in my curtain grids to do the subdivisions. I would certainly want vertical subdivisions, more than likely at my key joints. So as I begin to build that up at this point, I can go mullion, all grid lines, and really begin to work this as a system that's working directly underneath the roof. And any modifications that I start making to that roof edge start to work really well for me. So you can see there's definitely some inconsistencies in the process. You know, there's some things that I need to fix here. There are some things that I need to fix here. But it's starting to get at that idea of how we can make these complex forms. Edges like this, typically what I would do in using this is I would begin modeling a custom component to go over the top of that, or perhaps, you know, maybe I could use a really simple wall to do that as well. Same thing with this. I would probably be building a custom component to work within that, which isn't going to give me a perfect model for sure. But when we're working with systems like this, when we're working on systems that are this complicated, sometimes having those little inconsistencies are just something that you're going to have to deal with and resolve at different drawing, within different drawing views, with detail lines or with masking regions, as you begin to create your final working documents for something like this. Certainly, as long as you do a decent enough job, it should render out just fine. You shouldn't see the inconsistency. Where you're going to see the inconsistencies is where you're seeing edges and edge lines, hidden lines, things like that. Hope that helps in terms of building a sort of these complex ribbon-like roof forms. So I'm going to call this the Revit ribbon roof epilogue video, because as any of you have probably done that have been working in Revit on anything complicated, from time to time you go back and look at it and think, you know, is there a way that I could have done that better? I wasn't completely satisfied with the results of working with the last system. So I sat back down and kind of regrouped to see what I could do with a different mode of thinking, still using the massing model to build a ribbon, and still definitely using, you know, a surface by face. In this instance, I'm going to do the same thing with wall by face, and I'm a little bit happier with the results. So I thought I would just go ahead and build a video, attach it to the end of the first one, and share it. There are a few limitations. There's a give and take. There are a few errors that you'll see on this one as well. But by and large, this one just felt a little bit better. But I decided to leave them all in place just simply so that you could see the different options of doing things. So again, I've got this ribbon. I'm going to make some quick adjustments to it though. I'm going to click Edit. I'm going to go to my top view. And I'm going to pull in these outside edges because, again, if you remember that form, let's pull that up again really quick. This cuts back right here, and if I'm using the wall tool, I won't have the opportunity to build in that inset unless I actually sort of create it in the massing geometry. Wall openings aren't sort of like roof openings. There's not sort of a simple way to generate those. So again, that's a little bit sloppy. Let's pull this one in just a little bit more, but you get the idea. So that top edge of the ribbon is doing something slightly different. And if you'll also notice, I haven't built this last piece yet because I'm going to use a massing object to fill that gap in as it comes down. So slightly modified version of the ribbon, but I've been happier with the results on this. Still not perfect, but we'll talk our way through it here. So this time I'm going to use architecture, wall by face to follow the ribbon around. So I'm still going to use the 12-inch generic, and I'm still going to select these surfaces right here. I cannot select that because it is a horizontal surface, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. But one of the things that this does get me that I kind of like, it does maintain this sort of sense of warping. You know, so if that was an option rather than trying to triangulate it like we did with the roof, that would be kind of nice. So I have my walls in place, but now I need something to work this right here. So if I use either the floor or the roof, I get a similar result. I don't get anything to sort of complete those edges in. And on this one, you know, I suppose I could say, you know, I could edit the surface or I could modify the sub-elements and sort of drag them over. Well, even with that, I can't really drag them over. But I don't have a lot of options to sort of fill in those gaps. So I'm going to use a slightly different system. I'm going to go ahead and build a new massing model for that. So to do that, component, model in place, mass. And I'm going to go set, and I'm going to use that edge to set my reference plane. And I'm just going to trace this piece out, snapping to those endpoints. Except I'm going to go all the way to this outside edge. That outside edge. And then return back to the start. I'm going to select that entire surface and say create form. And I want that to be 1 foot in depth. Right there. So now what I need to do is I need to connect some dots together, and this is why I like to use massing to sort of do these kind of objects. I can slide that right over. Let's go to the other side. I'm going to slide, oh, grab the wrong piece there. Make sure I'm trying to be precise here and select just that arrow to drag things laterally. And on this one, I'm going to select this outside edge. And I'm going to pull that in so that it's in line with this piece right here. Okay, a little bit of eyeball work there, but that's okay. So I'm going to say Finish Mass. And you can see right away we've got a little bit of a problem that still has the mass blue texture on it. So let's go Edit in Place one more time. And I'm going to select this surface right here, and let's assign it the default material, which I think is defined as my generic walls as well. So I want to make sure that that has the same material that I'm using on my walls. So the last piece that I need to create then is a piece that connects these two together. I'm going to use the exact same trick to do that. Architecture, component, model in place, mass. And again, well, don't want to go to the top view yet. I want to set my work plane, set as this surface right here. Now I'm going to go to my top view, and I'm going to draw in edge to edge like that. So you can see where I've made that line. And I'm going to use pick lines and offset 1 foot like that. I'm going to piece this together here. I'm going to use pick lines again for this outside edge to make sure that they're aligned perfectly. Except I think I still might have had my offset on. There we go. That right on that line, because I want that edge, corner edge of the wall to match up with the floor joint. Trim those lines together. I think I got it. There we go. And now I just need to draw a line to connect these two pieces together. And now this surface should be ready to extrude up. Create form. So I'm simply going to pull this up vertically now. Like that. And again, I'm going to use the exact same trick again. I'm going to select my points. And I'm going to pull them in line with the wall. Looks like I need to switch to wireframe to see this inside point. And now I need to select this edge right here, and if you can see that, I'm going to just slide that laterally like that to get those to start lining up. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my realistic view here. And you can see I don't quite have this edge lining up. You know, I might want that to return back and in just a little bit. So I could certainly select those two surfaces and sort of slide them in. See if I can select that lower line. It's a little bit tricky to see from that angle. There we go. Just going to select that edge and this outside edge. And get them working so that this outside edge lines up just a little bit better. So you can see again, I also need to go ahead and select that and make sure that I'm using my same material for the wall. So you can see how that is starting to piece things together. Now, one of the things that you can see that's a little inconsistent is a little bit of overlap here and there. It's not so severe that I think it's going to show up on my renderings. It's definitely severe enough that it's going to make a difference in terms of how I do elevation, hidden line work, that kind of thing. So, essentially something like that, that's where I come in and start using annotation lines to sort of cover those things up, or detail lines, I should say, under annotate and detail lines to start touching those kind of things up, or perhaps masking regions, if I really want to be precise and follow that edge around. But let's do one more thing. One of the things that I lose by doing this is I do lose the ability to lock curtain wall, like we did with the roof. If I draw the curtain wall in underneath this, and this is a roof, it will lock automatically up to the top of that if I tell it to. And so I don't get that. So drawing a curtain wall in there can be a little bit trickier to do. So let's look at doing that with this kind of system. If I come in and say architecture and wall, and let's choose the curtain wall tool. And I'm going to draw a curtain wall underneath this, just like that. And let's say that we want that curtain wall to follow this edge. It's a really tricky thing to do because on top of everything else, a wall like this one or a roof that I'm drawing in with the wall tool is not on axis. It is warped. So those are actually sort of curved lines that are happening. So it's a really tricky thing to build. So the process that I've used to approximate getting this close is I will go to my level 1 and I'll go view, elevation, and I'll set an elevation very, very close. And again, remember, elevations really are sections all the time. And so what I'm doing is I'm selecting that front triangle, and I'm going to build a section / elevation of that curtain wall, just off of where that curtain wall actually is. So again, the elevation tool is going to snap me a view running parallel with my curtain wall, and then I'm using this blue line to define where the actual section cut is. So if I navigate to that, I can see a really close cut through my section of right where that curtain wall is running. So I'm going to select my curtain wall and say Edit Profile. Now, the first instinct is to go ahead and use pick lines to select these things around here, but pick lines don't work because this edge is not coplanar with my curtain wall. It's also not actually a true edge because that's, again, it's sort of a curved line. It's actually warping back into space. So what I usually do in a case like this is, again, I kind of eyeball it. I'll go ahead and trace these lines in right over the top of where my cut is. And again, I know this isn't going to be perfect, but build something like this in reality, and you're going to find that if you're not really careful with this kind of work, you will find joints covered in caulking. So this is always one of those instances where I say, you want to be close. If you're living within a quarter of an inch of the actual detail, the actual build of something like this is going to be spot on. I mean, this is so much closer, so much more precise than the actual construction in the real world could happen because of the complexity of these shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and green check this, and you can see that curtain wall has been built right to the inside. And if I get in really close, you can see a little bit of air between those two. And that's where I'm talking about, if you're building really complex forms, you've got to work really close with the general contractors, all the subcontractors, to make sure that you don't have a 1 foot gap there full of caulking. So again, same trick with this. Once I come into architecture, I can use my curtain grid tool and begin to subdivide this in a way that makes sense, first with the joints, and second, hopefully in a way that has some aesthetic meaning to it. Architecture, mullions, all grid lines, and place that in. Oops. Click too soon. All grid lines. Can't place mullion family on this curtain wall. That's simply saying because some of them are a little bit off. And that's, again, you can see a little bit of airspace right there, but not enough for me to worry about, and also not enough that I would feel like that is not possible to construct. So the last thing that I would look at doing is from level 1. Let's set up a really quick view so we can understand how well this is actually going to render out. What kind of joints we're going to see, what kind of errors we're going to see in this kind of view. So on a really quick render, what I'm hoping to see is that the joints, everything are lining up reasonably well. There's definitely a gap right here that I would want to fix. That's probably beyond Photoshop. And then the tiling, the weirdness that you see right here is simply where I have not hidden that mass element yet. But you can start to see this is going to work pretty well for renderings, then with some significant touch-up in terms of the hidden line work. Sorry to post this as an epilogue to what we had, but what I want you to see is there's a lot of different pathways in terms of working with these complex shapes. And you have to work through multiple options. You've got to build multiple tests to see which one is working the best, especially when there's perhaps not a perfect system or a perfect process to build something.